Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Forum Online. My name is Lauren Stewart, and I'm the Director of Operations and Customer Relations at BookNet. My esteemed colleague, Noah Genner, BookNet's President and CEO, has put this presentation and insights together and is available after the presentation to answer your questions. I'll put up a slide with how to reach us at the end. Thanks to Noah, you are watching a presentation on the Canadian English language book market in calendar 2023. Today we'll be looking at data that BookNet has gathered at the start of 2024 on the book market and book readers and consumer behavior in 2023. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that BookNet's operations are remote and that our colleagues contribute their work from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wyandot, the Mi'kmaq, the Ojibwe of Fort William First Nation, the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, and the Métis, the original peoples of the lands we now call Beaton, Brampton, Guelph, Halifax, Thunder Bay, Toronto, Vaughan, and Windsor. BookNet endorses the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and supports an ongoing shift from gatekeeping to space-making in the book industry. I encourage you to visit the native-land.ca website to learn more about the peoples whose land you are joining from today. As a warning as we get started, some of the numbers we're going to show in this presentation are going to be somewhat negative. 2023 was a weird year for book sales in Canada, but we wanted to start with a positive data point to help offset some of the negativity that's coming our way. Good news, 80% of adult English-speaking Canadians said that they read a book last year. We will come back to this number in a little bit, but let's start rolling with some market insights first. We are going to begin by looking at data from B&C sales data, which tracks print book sales from approximately 80 to 85% of the trade market in English-speaking Canada. Referring to our reporting panel of retailers from across a wide range of retail channels, last year we tracked over $1.1 billion of books sold in Canada, which amounts to over 48.5 million units. If you're wondering how this compares to previous years, each column on this bar graph represents total sales in millions of units from 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, respectively. That downward trend is a little alarming, but just a note that these numbers are pulled from what we call the all markets in sales data, which is not ideal for measuring year-over-year change as we are always adding to that group with new retailers. And there is the opportunity that sales may be happening in channels which we do not get data for, which is why we always want to work closely with publishers and other industry stakeholders to fill the gaps in sales data so that we always have an ever increasingly complete view of the industry and book sales in Canada. On this slide, you will see unit sales broken down by week. Week numbers are on the horizontal axis. Over the last year, you can see the weirdness that happened in the winter of last year. This was because of some issues at one of our large retailers. We processed some data late. Other than those issues, 2023 and 2022 were actually quite similar, with 2023 being slightly below 2022. But are we back to quote-unquote normal? Let's explore what we mean by being slightly below. We mentioned earlier that our all markets view of the data can be challenging because there may be retailers added to it throughout the year. To counter that, we do have a group of comparable stores that is stabilized. Looking at this group of retailers on this slide, their sales are actually down pretty significantly year over year. While a lot of channels were down year over year last year, with the exception of the indie channel, which was up a little year over year, but compared to the rest of the market, indie retailers did pretty well. This situation with one of the large retailers that I mentioned on the last slide was really difficult for the market as a whole. We also cannot ignore customer sentiment here either. To add a little context from this data, we have some comparable data from the US. On this slide, you are seeing a year-over-year comparison of the print book market from 2022 to 2023 for the US market, courtesy of BookScan, and Canada from sales data. You can see it's fairly similar. The US had a better year overall than we did in Canada. We did have some retail challenge that made things tough for the market here last year, but of note, both markets did well in fiction last year. Each column on this bar graph represents a percentage of units sold from 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, respectively, insofar as Frontlist, which are books published within the year being measured, and backlist is concerned. 2023 looks a lot like 2019 here. Perhaps the increased percentage for Frontlist in 2023 compared to 2022 is inflated due to issues at some retailers in 2023 in procuring backlist. So let's look a little bit more closely at Frontlist. This is a look at the bestsellers from sales data last year. 60% of the top 5 bestsellers were Frontlist titles. Autobiographies reigned supreme last year, but there was the perennial Dogman and the ever-present Colleen Hoover. But let's look at Canadian bestsellers in the print market. Here we see mostly nonfiction. Technically, 60% are Frontlist again, but the remaining 40% were published very late in 2022, and one of them even had a boost because of other events. BookNet Canada also collects physical circulation data from public libraries through our BNC Library Data project. Currently, we have 27 public library systems reporting their physical book circulation and holdings data to BNC Library Data. The reporting libraries encompass 606 branches and cover approximately 25% of the Canadian population. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but we thought we would show the top Canadian checkouts from library data. On this slide, you can see the top 5 circulated Canadian print titles from public libraries last year. Of note, libraries are generally much more oriented to backlist than sales are from retailers. On this slide, we see a subject breakdown for the all markets view of our sales data retail sales panel. Physical book sales are still dominated by children's books, at least when it comes to unit sales. There's a little growth in the fiction category at the expense of nonfiction this year, but not a lot of change when you look at the macro subject categories. But if we dig into these areas a little more, we can see some interesting trends. So let's have a look at a couple of subjects that saw a lot of movement in 2023. On this slide, we can see the growth in the romance category between 2022 to 2023. That growth increased to 9% last year, surpassing over 3 million units sold. This is a category that has continued to grow even through 2023. We also saw an increase in our consumer surveying. So even though romance is still crushing it, it's interesting to see the shifts that have taken place within that category over the past year. This graph here allows you to see some of those shifts. Contemporary romance is still one of the highest performing subcategories of romance in 2023, with Colleen Hoover, Hannah Grace, Carly Fortune, and Lucy Score dominating the romance charts. However, you can see there was the slightest shift in this category between 2022 and 2023, where contemporary romance went down by 5%. Romantic comedy is another higher performing romance subcategory, which in 2023 actually went down by 9%. Regency, this was a romance subcategory that we saw trending in past years due to the popularity of the Bridgerton Netflix series, but in 2023 we can see it's gone down a bit by 35%. So while subjects like these have gone down, on the flip side, we've seen huge increases in the subcategory of fantasy, which increased by 235% between 2022 and 2023. And this brings us to our next topic. I'm sure you've heard about it. Everyone's talking about it. We certainly can't avoid it, so let's get into it. What is Romantasy? The Guardian describes Romantasy as a portmanteau of romance and fantasy, applied to novels that blend elements of both genres. These novels are typically set in fantastical worlds with fairies, dragons, magic, but can also feature classic romance plot lines, enemies to lovers, soulmates, and love triangles. As a defined genre, it's been around since as early as 2008, but within the last year it's really taken off with authors like Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros. Much of this boom is due to its popularity on social media platforms like TikTok. There are also theories that readers are responding to the element of escapism that Romantasy offers. While darker subgenres of fantasy were popular in the early 2010s with gritty, dark tales like Game of Thrones, we are now seeing the rise of cozy fantasy and romantasy and fairy tale fantasy, books that have a bit more of an uplifting feel to them. But When we use sales data, we're using BIZAC codes, and there is no Romantasy BIZAC code. For the purposes of this presentation, we looked at the following BIZAC headings: romance as a subheading within the fiction fantasy category, fantasy as a subheading within the fiction romance category, as well as romance within the young adult fantasy category. Across all three of these categories, there was a significant growth trend between 2022 and 2023, with fantasy romance increasing by 57%, romance fantasy increasing by 234%, and YA fantasy romance increasing by 331%. So we can absolutely confirm here that the headlines are correct. Romantasy is moving up. Some of the top performing titles for romance fantasy in 2023 are The Throne of Glass books by Sarah J. Maas, A Soul of Ash and Blood by Jennifer Armentrout, and A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. If this kind of thing is of interest to you, we have a sales data webinar about trends that you can view on our Tech Forum site or on YouTube. Use the QR code on the screen to access the video of that presentation for lots more. And let's wrap up the sales data market by having a look at Canadian sales. Here we have another bar graph from sales data with the 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 years compared, this time for total sales and market share of Canadian contributor titles. Of note, while the market as a whole was down around 9%, Canadian contributors were up a little year over year between 2022 and 2023. Of note, there were 39,216 Canadian contributor ISBNs with sales reported against them in 2023. So that's for the English trade market. Let's look at Quebec. Here we have French language sales in Canada from Gaspard. Note here that the graph is dollar value, not units. The blue column on the left, Gaspard Booksellers, is equivalent to our all markets. Gaspard's national publishers represents domestic publishing, which accounts for 52% of the French language market in Canada. Their international publishers represent what we would consider distributed imports, which accounts for about 48% of the French language market. They tracked 239 locations, and overall, they were down 1% in unit sales year over year. And here's some additional context for the data that we gather in BNC sales data and some high-level numbers for you. Our 2,749 retail outlets represent a cross-section of all channels in Canada and represent approximately 80 to 85% of the physical book market. In 2023, we added 33 new retailers to sales data. Some of those had multiple outlets, but this makes 2023 our third most successful year in BookNet's history insofar as retail recruitment is concerned. If you want more information on category bestsellers and performance, our Canadian book market annual for 2023 is available from our website. There's a QR code on the slide that you can scan to get that. And let's go back to that 80% number from the beginning of the presentation and look at the book market from a slightly different perspective. We wanted to share some insights from our leisure and reading survey, where we asked 1,000 adult English-speaking readers about their reading behavior in the previous year. Specifically, we asked respondents if they read a book in the last year. The column to the far right is for January 2024, and the previous columns indicate the January results from 2023, 2022, and so on back to 2015, which is on the furthest left. You can see that there was not a lot of change in the results. From 83% back in 2015 with less than a handful of percentage points up and down year over year, taking us to 2024 when 80% of respondents said that they read a book in the last year. However, it looks like people are reading less. The frequency of reading is actually down. So let's take a look at that now. Again, looking at our leisure and reading study results from January 2024, we asked respondents to indicate the formats of the books they read the last year. 82% of readers read a print book, which is down from 84% in 2022. Frequency of that reading is also less. 69% of readers read an ebook, which is up from 67% and has been steadily increasing year over year. Frequency also looks like it's increasing here. 54% of readers read an audiobook, which is up from 51% in 2022, the largest increase amongst all formats. Frequency also looks like it's increasing. Here's some more data from that same leisure and reading study. Respondents were asked to think about the books that they read the last year and select the type of books that they read from the following list. They could select multiple types of books, and it does appear that readers are reading more diversely than they did the previous year, with all options being up over 2022. You can see the year over year change on the right hand side of the slide. Also, let's talk a bit about the diversity of people's reading. 71% of readers felt it is important that books about a group or a culture should be written by people from that group or culture. 85% of readers feel it is important that authors accurately represent their material through research, fact checking, and are hiring reviewers and sensitivity or beta readers. And 90% of readers feel that books should be representative of a variety of experiences. Inevitably, when we talk leisure time, we have to talk about leisure spending. We don't want to belabor the point, but the economy and inflation is impacting people's spending, and it isn't just books. This slide has a graphic from the Bank of Canada's survey of consumer expectations back from Q4 2023. This is showing how some consumer behaviors that would normalize with the end of a period of high inflation actually remain near survey highs. For instance, many consumers are still reducing or postponing purchases because of their inflation expectations, and people are still following inflation more closely than they usually do. But let's come back to books and our leisure and reading study. We asked respondents to select the statement that best describes their book buying. Amongst readers, borrowing was up and spending was down. The number of people who didn't buy any books, i.e., they only borrowed or got their books for free, didn't change year over year. However, the amount that buyers were willing to spend on books was less across the board. This helps set the context for the print book market that we saw in sales data in 2023. To wind up this State of the Nation update, let's look at our Canadian book consumer panel. This one is a quarterly surveying of Canadians about their book buying and reading habits, and these results are from surveys fielded in March, June, September, and December 2023 to English-speaking adult Canadians. The survey is designed to eke out the most popular formats and subjects, insights on why and how Canadians acquire books, the reasons why Canadians decide to read, buy, or borrow specific books, and data comparing and contrasting buyers and borrowers. Let's start by looking at how people acquire books. This question, how did they acquire books, shows how respondents to our survey told us they acquired books in the last year. Over the course of the years, we queried about 4,000 adult Canadians on the following book acquisition activities monthly. There's not a lot of change year over year. We can't compare to 2022 because we changed the question a little, but the numbers are similar. 2,045 respondents, 48%, bought a new book, and these are the people we survey more fully. 30% borrowed a book from a library, 21% bought a used book, 20% got a book for free, and etc. This graph looks at percentage of age category who acquired a book in each way. So apologies in advance for the busyness of the graph on this slide, but there is a lot going on here. This slide is showing the breakdown of how respondents acquired their books broken down by age. People can check more than one option, so the percentages by age group can total more than 100. The different colors correspond to the different age categories, and the black bar shows the average for all respondents, which are the numbers from the previous slide. Overall, the middle age ranges, 35 to 54 years, acquire the most books, averaging close to 2 books a month. The older cohorts, 55 or more, acquire the least number of books, averaging close to 1. The younger groups get books for free more often, either as a gift, borrowing from someone else, or via some other means. Buying new books is dominated by the 35 to 54-year-olds. We will have more demographic breakdowns coming later. Stay tuned to our blog. We've talked about how people acquire books, so let's take a look at where they got them. In 2023, 55% of all book purchases were made online and 45% in a physical location. You can see the impact of the COVID lockdowns in 2020 and 2021 and the move back to what things looked like before the pandemic, going back to 2022 and 2023. However, we haven't quite got back to 2019, and we even saw a little growth in online again in the Q4 of 2023. Not a big change, but something we are going to keep an eye on. So let's look at just physical books for a minute. We can see that physical retail channels have moved back above online post lockdowns, but it is an almost 50-50 split. Let's look back at the overall market again. We also asked the respondents where they are purchasing their books. Here again, the responses for each year span from 2019 to 2023. You can see a continuing decrease in online book buying and an increase in bookstore shopping. From elsewhere in the survey, buyers tell us they visited bookstores significantly more in 2023 than they did in 2022, with both the number and frequency of visits being up in 2023. We have lots of data to look into for this, so keep an eye out as our blog and newsletters will be the first place for updates. This chart compares 2019 to 2023 in terms of the formats the respondents confirmed they purchased in 2023. The growth of paperbacks in 2023 is notable and looks to be a shift back from ebooks. This is a trend that has continued since the height of the pandemic. This shrinking of ebook purchasing is in contrast to what we are seeing in the reading of ebooks, which looks like it is growing, so we need to look into that a bit more. Let's dig a little bit deeper into formats. Here we have the percentage of buyers who bought particular formats. Unsurprisingly, most people bought a print book. Buyers who buy digital are much more open to purchasing other formats. We can see that when we look at the quantities they are purchasing each month. How many people are just print buyers? How many people are just ebook buyers? Well, 1,508 bought a print book, 74%, 582 bought an ebook, 29%, and 309 bought an audiobook, 15%. But of that, 1,019 only bought a print book, 50%, 151 only bought ebooks, 7%, and 47 only bought audiobooks, which is 2%. This is the average number of purchases by month for buyers of particular formats. You can see that ebook and audiobook buyers buy a lot of books. Is this a price thing, a subscription thing? Sorry, these are teasers for research that is still to come. Again, keep an eye on our blog and sign up for our updates using our newsletters for more to come. One of the things we like to pay attention to is how people are becoming aware of the books that they are buying. This is the percentage of purchases that had these options checked, and respondents could check more than one option, so they will not add up to 100. So, 21% of purchases said that awareness was created by reading other books by the author. 20% said that they looked at recommendations. 18% said that they were browsing and searching. And 12% attributed it to social media. We didn't see a big year-over-year change, but there were some changes. Browsing and search were down year-over-year, and recommendation and reviews and social media were up. Some of this might be tied to people being more frugal with their money. Generally, we have seen that online, there's less browsing and more specific searching, and also that impulse buying was down, though not a lot. In terms of social media channels, Facebook and YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X, formerly Twitter, are used the most often among book buyers. Instagram is continuing to grow. Twitter is falling, but not a lot. There is a series of posts going up on our blog these days that is a lot more detail on format preferences, pricing tolerance, store visits, and more. Visit the BookNet blog or follow the QR code on screen to get linked to it right away. And on this slide, we have listed some of the major research publications you will see coming out from BookNet in the coming months. We have a lot of free content on our blog as well, and our newsletters will always have snippets and links. Of note, the new release of the Canadian book market has just been released and can be purchased from the BNC website. And finally, last year we mentioned that the book market was going to be defined by some large trends: a continued bounce back of physical retail, the importance of mobile in reading and shopping, book talk, and finally the uncertainty around the economy and what it was going to do to people's leisure spending. All of those look like they had some impact last year, with the uncertainty about the economic landscape likely being the largest. We have already discussed some of the subject trends we are likely to see in 2024, so we will leave that out of here for a bit now. But let's focus on some of the macro trends that are likely to have an impact on the Canadian book market this year. First, AI. From AI-generated books to data and analytics, AI will continue to be a focus in 2024. Content creators, publishers, and retailers are all trying to figure out how and when to take advantage of some of the technologies. We are already feeling the impact of this, and this will continue to grow throughout 2024. Social media and influencers, book talk is still a thing, and there is a huge growth in bookstagrammers that are both helping to drive awareness and sales of numerous titles. As we mentioned earlier, social media continues to grow as an awareness factor for book readers and consumers. Consumer sentiment on the economy and politics. There was a slight uptick in consumer sentiment in Canada at the end of 2023, and it remains to be seen if this will continue throughout 2024. With concerns about everything from inflation to global affairs, consumers have been watching their spending closely. Sustainability. This last one might be a little bit aspirational, but there are a lot of efforts afoot to make the book industry more sustainable. This is something consumers continue to tell us matters to them when selecting what and how to buy. Much of it is about managing risk and just makes good business sense. Will sustainability become an even bigger issue for our businesses and consumer in 2024? Well, let's see how those macro trends impact the Canadian book industry next year. So that's all we have for you today. We're happy to take some questions if you have the time, but if not so much, or if you have questions you'd like to ask over email, we've put up our research email, which is research@booknetcanada.ca, where you can reach our team. Feel free to reach out and remember to sign up to our e-news for up-to-date market information. That link is also on the slide. Thanks, everyone.